Hey folks, welcome back to the DarkHorse Podcast live stream Q&A section. Sorry about the shenanigans with the timer up front. We briefly slipped off our timeline, landed on one that was pretty freaking great, and then suddenly, zap, we were back here.
Right here.
Right here.
This one does have cats, though.
Yes,
so
many cats.
We're always pleased to provide cats for those of you who enjoy them, and for those of you who don't, why not? Seriously, what's wrong with you?
Dog people.
Well, we also have a dog. She is looking at the cats, wondering why she doesn't get treats. She'll get treats.
Sooner or later.
Yeah. All right. We are going to start with some questions from episode 42 and then move into today's questions. All right. The first one is just a comment that came in a couple times. Please see Wynton Marsalis's The Ever Funky Lowdown. Apparently he was on Bill Maher. I don't know it, but it came in enough times that I thought I'd share it.
I am so curious as to why this would come up multiple times.
Yeah.
It's got to be more than just a cool song.
Yeah, I would think so.
All right. It's a great title.
Yeah, indeed. The next question that I had pulled from last episode actually got repeated today. So believe it or not, MD Dunn, I had already decided that we were going to answer your question, which last time read, I know they're important, but why do bats have to be so effing creepy all the time?
Oh, boy. Yeah, they ain't effing creepy. Here's the thing. You encounter bats at a time when you're feeling a sense of foreboding and creepiness because night is falling or something like that. And when you get to know bats, they really aren't this way. For one thing, you probably don't realize that there are something like 1,000 species of bats on Earth. That's a large number of different kinds of creatures. That's almost a quarter of mammal species. And they are tremendously diverse. Some of them are even quite beautiful, quite easy to relate to. You've probably seen flying foxes from the old world. Those are fruit bats and flower bats from the old world that look like dogs, except hung upside down. Yeah, there's one. Can you put this on the screen? Yeah, that's a pteropodid. Now, this is a non-echolocating bat. In a family that includes some very large creatures. But anyway, bats I worked on were New World fruit bats, which are a little strange looking. Zach, could you put up the picture I gave you? All right, so here's some tent-making bats. I took this picture the last time Heather and I were in the Amazon. These guys are tiny little bats, like 10 grams a piece. And you see they have fleshy little appendages on their noses. Those appendages do not have any bone in them. Those appendages, when you hold one of these animals in your hand, the nose leaf jitters back and forth very remarkably. If you watch bat mothers tend to their offspring, it's absolutely adorable, right? They have tiny numbers of offspring. Mothers will fly around with a bat attached to them under their wing, and then when the animal is large enough that the mother can't fly with it, at the point that the baby is more than 25% the size of the mother, they'll leave it in the roost, and they'll come back and they'll ferociously clean its wings of parasites and things like this, and feed the offspring. Anyway, they really are.
In mammals, a mother's care for her baby is universal.
It is universal.
Even in Centaurio senex.
You would bring up the...
I did, yeah. Zach, would you show Centaurio senex, the wrinkle-faced bat?
You've got it upside down.
Yes, indeed. Google returned it to me upside down.
Oh, really?
Yeah, surprising, right?
Google is in the dark, as it were. So this animal...
this is another phylostomatid, right?
Phylostomid, yes. It's a phylostomid bat, fruit eater. And this animal eats fruits that it can't carry. So it kind of buries its face in a large fruit on the tree, which is probably why selection has purged the face of fur. When this animal sleeps, it pulls a flap of skin over its face, and that flap of skin has 2 light spots in it, so it can see shadows through it. It's not a handsome creature.
No. It even hides from itself.
But anyway, I guess my point would be this.
In part 2, I mean, you started, I showed a picture of the flying fox. You started by saying the flying foxes are quite beautiful, but no one living in the New World ever sees those. Like they're not here. And one of the misnomers is that there's Old World and New World bats, and all the so-called Old World bats are these beautiful flying foxes. No, these microbats, these echolocators, are actually the vast majority of bats throughout the world, and there are only a few of the megabats that are quite beautiful, actually. But unless you're in the Old World, which includes Australia and Africa and some parts of South Asia, you'll never run into them.
Yeah.
And even so, what you might run into is, actually we did on one of our first trips to Madagascar, is a tree full of them just beginning to wake up at night, and you might effectively startle yourself so much that you embarrass yourself in front of the local people, as we did.
Never happened. But anyway, the thing is, you don't have good access to bats in general, so you don't realize that all of the characteristics that make a creature endearing, look, you probably think rodents are kind of creepy and gross, right? But then you realize squirrels are rodents, and squirrels are actually tremendously engaging, highly intelligent, fun to watch. And I find bats are kind of like this too. There are some species that are creepy. I mean, vampire bats, now that's a creepy animal, and it smells creepy. But a fishing bat is an amazing animal that can basically detect the presence of fish. When fish come up to the surface to feed, they make a ripple. This bat can detect the ripple with an echolocation call, and it swoops in over the water and gaffs the fish. This is an amazing, remarkable thing, and it's not creepy. It's fascinating. When you watch a fruit bat cleaning its young, it's endearing. And so anyway, I think a lot of this has to do with the fact that A, humans are sort of predisposed to be creeped out by things in the dark, and B, that our encounter with bats is often at a distance and sort of the jarring discovery that, oh, that's not a bird. But that close encounters with these things reveal that they are really interesting mammals that, if flipped right side up and in the day, you would feel very differently about them.
All right, next question. Are humans the only species that use dopamine? And does evolutionary biology have anything interesting to say about dopamine and social media? I meant to actually look this up to make sure, but I believe that dopamine is at least as old as vertebrates, and it may actually extend far older than that into the history of animals. So certainly it's not just humans or primates or mammals. It's at least all vertebrates, and maybe far older than that.
Right. But what that means and what that doesn't mean is a little bit tougher of a puzzle. So you get into this with actually Peterson and his the reason that he is associated with lobsters is that his point is that serotonin, I believe, is associated with dominance hierarchies, and it goes back to our branching point with the crustaceans. And so at least that part goes back. Yeah, right. And so his point is, this isn't a human thing. Get over it. Right. This is a really, really ancient thing. And his point is right about this. Now, the problem, though, if you want to challenge it, is these molecules are part of an agreement, right? A physical agreement. The molecule, be it a hormone or a pheromone, is a molecule built to trigger a receptor when it hits it, because it has the right shape and the right configuration of charges on its surface. It could be anything, right? So you could take dopamine and you could engineer a system in which dopamine did serotonin's job and serotonin did dopamine's job. Yep. And it would work just as well, because the point is, well, it's actually like this. When you hit yourself in the eye and you see light, why did you see light? There's no light. Right? You see light because those are light receptors, and you've triggered them with pressure, but they detect it as light because they send a message to the part of the brain that detects light. And so the point is, what it's wired to is what dictates what it does, not the shape of the molecule. The molecule is totally arbitrary. So
in the case of, for instance, Peterson's lobsters, serotonin is ancient, and hierarchies are ancient. And the link between those two also turns out to be ancient, but that third thing isn't inherently true just because the first two things are true.
Right. It doesn't have to be true.
Right.
One of two things could be true.
It is in this case.
Right.
But right.
It could be that the molecule was associated with hierarchies in lobsters, and it is associated with hierarchies in us, but that wasn't a continuous process, or it can be that it was continuous. But it doesn't really matter. In the case of dopamine, it will serve a very similar function for many, many ancestors, right? So back probably through all of mammals, dopamine is going to play a reward role. Does it play that reward role, in vertebrates deeper than that? I don't know. I would guess it probably does.
Yeah, that'd be my guess too, but I don't know.
But it doesn't really matter. Yes, very ancient, not about humans in the slightest.
Yeah. So the second part of that question, which we're probably spending too long on these early questions, is does evolutionary biology have anything interesting to say about dopamine and social media?
Well, yeah. Obviously, a mechanism that causes you to release dopamine captures your attention and tends to get you focused on it. So, for example, a would-be lover who tantalizes you such that you feel rewarded for being in their presence, right, captures your attention and makes it harder for somebody else to get your attention. So that can be a game. Now, in that case, it's a natural game, and you may have an interest in playing along. In the case of the social media platforms, they have gamified their war with each other. In order to keep you on site, they have figured out how to trigger rewards that shouldn't be triggered in you. So it may be that you should go out and do some exercise and go encounter something real, but Facebook is tricking you into staying on Facebook by making you feel as if you're doing something that's good for you, and it causes self-harm. And so anyway, Tristan Harris would be the go-to guy on this question. We should have him on the podcast.
Oh, absolutely.
For sure. But yes, so it does have something to say. Mostly what it says is that this endogenous system is being gamed for somebody else's advantage.
That's right. And final question from episode 42. What's the explanation for totalitarianism? I don't think the woke left sees themselves as totalitarian, but does that mean it comes naturally?
All right. I would say the explanation for totalitarianism is in some ways just almost too obvious, which is that you can do very good things for you if you have total power over people, right? And so the ways for people to discover that it is the right thing for them to do to install a system that just so happens to put them in charge of what you do, that's an evergreen discovery, and in both senses of the term, I guess. But yes, it is. And the whole point for the rest of us is to figure out, hey, how can we stabilize a system that does good for people in some way that's fairly distributed and resists falling into totalitarianism? And what we are facing now is the pull of totalitarianism is we are in a tractor beam and we are being pulled towards something stupid. And it could be one of a couple different kinds, but it hardly matters because what we have is better than that. We should fix what we have so we don't fall into the black hole.
Yeah. And there's this always a tension between what has been and what could be, which is sometimes understood as conservative versus liberal, as the past versus the future, as orthodoxy versus heterodoxy. But the fact is that we need both. And the totalitarians always come pretending to be, well, I don't know about always. These now are pretending to be about the future. And so come cloaked in the language of the left, of course, this is, it has actually nothing to do with, will this look like the future or the past? It's, will this look like it's good for me or good for everyone? Oh, it's gonna be good for me. That's why. That's actually what it ends up at. And are some people actually confused? Do some people not see that who are engaged in this movement? Probably, but it doesn't matter because it's still what's going to be the effect. Okay, the next question before we get into questions from episode 43 came from the Discord server, where they, people on the Discord server vote on one question every week that they want answered here. The unscientific issues plaguing academia and public discourse are not new. Pinker notes similar conflicts between E.O. Wilson, Trivers, Dawkins, and radical science. For instance, they don't specify it here, but Gould and Lewontin and the Spandrels of San Marco. Can we solve the problem of ideologically driven scholarship or merely mitigate its effects? What selective pressures are necessary to create a system that rewards objectivity?
Sweet question.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think actually this is simple to articulate what it needs to be, difficult to implement. But if you think back to the good old days, which were not so good, but the good old days in which science discovered things regularly of high value without so much garbage, they actually existed in an era in which people's incentives were aligned. Now, I'm not advocating for a science in which only the rich can participate, but when the rich participate in science, they are in some sense immune from the short-term financial corruptions that dog others, right? So if you had gentlemen scientists, they were free to say heterodox things, and if it didn't interrupt their ability to earn, because basically wealth was the substitute for earning. So the point is, if you want the system to work well,
which is a little bit like what tenure is supposed to create.
Yep, tenure is supposed to, and it doesn't work.
It's supposed to replicate the aristocracy, the protections that the aristocracy have.
Right, and let's just say the reason tenure doesn't work, in my opinion, or at least one of them, is that the rigors of what you have to go through to get tenure are mutually exclusive with the instincts that will cause you to use tenure to good effect, right? So they ensure that you're not up to anything heterodox.
Stay in line, stay in line, stay in line, stay in line. Okay, you're free. You have anything to say?
Right.
No, actually, it turns out not.
And so you can think of this as the same thing as our electoral politics, right? It's like, let's see how good you are at this corruption game, and then you achieve office. And it's like, well, act on behalf of the public. Well, not bloody likely. You've basically, tested people's mathematical ability with a pole vaulting competition or something. But if you want this system to work, you have to align people's incentives with being right in the long term. That's one of the things that should somehow reward you. So if you're after legacy, if you want to be remembered forever, being really, really, really right is the way to do it, right? The other thing, not just being really, really, really right, but being really, really, really early. We want you really right and really early. That's the gold standard. Now, the problem that we have, which I have decried many times, is that we honor things that are a little bit early, right? Stuff that's too early, we absolutely murder that stuff. We murder that stuff, and then we never rehabilitate it. We don't go back and say, by the way, you know who turned out to be right? This person who was 200 years ahead of Darwin, right?
Very occasionally, those stories do get resurrected. And I can't come up with any of those examples right now, but in part, the problem is that it's, by virtue of it being that early, it's unrecognizable by almost everyone. So some of those people have, simply a vested interest in keeping the status quo, of course, and so would not see it even if they could. But most people simply cannot see that which comes so early that none of the context yet exists.
Right. But our system of peer review is the biggest obstacle to this working, right? Because peer review manages to keep all of the really heterodox stuff out as a matter of quality control, which means at the point that somebody turns out to have been way ahead of their time, there's likely to be very little evidence of it. And certainly it's not evidence that you have to deal with.
Well, it's not just peer review, of course. It's the market incentives by universities to have faculty who bring in large grants, because the large grants get 28 to 75-ish% taken off the top as overhead to run the universities. And so you want scientists, if you're a university who's bringing in large grants from, if you're in the United States, probably NSF, NIH, DOD, whatever it is. And that means that big science, that is big, expensive science, is that which is preferred, is selected for. And so sort of, the kind of math that you could do on a chalkboard, or the kind of research that you could do in the field with a machete and duct tape and paracord and a plane ticket, not really encouraged by big universities, because they don't bring in the grants that allow the overhead to run the libraries and clean the sidewalks and such. What?
I'm imagining many of the people we have known taking the method section that you just sketched out there and duct taping a plane ticket to a machete, or I don't know what they would be doing. But all right. So the problem, though, is we have to the incentives don't allow the people into the system for the reason you just described, because of the grant overhead. Peer review prevents the lodging. It's very hard to short the field to the school of thought that owns the field and say, actually, they've got it wrong, because it won't be registered anywhere. It'll be treated as kook stuff, and then you won't be able to resurrect it. Even the the preprint servers, which in theory should correct for this, you have to have a certain credential in order to even use them. So they bar people who are outside, who should be able to lodge their shorting of the field just as prominently.
Well, and this is one of the few exciting things about early COVID pandemic, actually, as we talked about in our early episodes, right? That the preprint servers were suddenly just alive with so many papers that hadn't been vetted. And did that mean that there was a lot of dross? Sure. But did that also mean that there was a lot of stuff that we normally wouldn't have been able to see because it would have been vetted out of existence, but it actually needed to be seen? Yes, also.
Yeah. The reduction in quality control actually served science beautifully. It was the demonstration that those of us who aren't so fond of peer review were right, because it was a very vibrant period. Yeah. I would just point out one other thing. This is a hard game to beat. There's a part of me that actually has a reaction people don't understand, where I quite like it when my colleagues attack me for being stupid, right? Because in so doing, they are lodging the fact that they and I disagree over something. And so for example, there was this case where I had put out a video advocating for explorer modes as an evolutionary phenomenon. And I got attacked by Jerry Coyne and Richard Dawkins and Steven Pinker and Neil Shubin, right? And people were like, oh, and my feeling was like, yes, exactly. Do you know what they just did? They just announced that they disagree with this idea, which I am quite certain will turn out to be right. Now, it may take a long time, but at the very least, it's going to be very hard to obscure the fact that they didn't believe it because they were all very vocal about it. So I would just say we should be allowing people to lodge these objections to the dominant school of thought. And then if you turn out to be non-trivially right, if you turn out to be right for the right reasons and very far ahead of your time, then the point is actually, well, what else do you know? That's what we should be looking for.
Yeah. Okay, we gotta go a little faster through these. Now, finally, we are going to get to the first question from today. Is the rise of social justice a religious revolution that our cultural adaptation... Wait a minute. Is the rise of social justice a religious revolution, our cultural adaptation to prevent religious war, that is religious... No, it's not.
It's not?
No. Our cultural adaptation to prevent religious war can't recognize or solve because the standard conception of a religion assumes metaphysical claims. Is it the same for Marxism generally? So I'm going to try to read it again. It's not or, but there's some punctuation missing, probably because of character limits. Is the rise of social justice a religious revolution, which our cultural adaptation to prevent religious war, which would preclude religious pluralism, can't recognize or solve because the standard conception of a religion assumes metaphysical claims? And is that the same for Marxism generally? So, broadly, social justice has been widely discussed by us, I think first by John McWhorter, certainly by James Lindsay, as actually fitting all of the rubrics for religion. But the person asking the question is saying maybe most people can't recognize it because it doesn't have the metaphysical thing. And might that also be the same explanation for why people don't recognize Marxism as a religion?
So I think there's a lot to this.
Yeah,
I think it's a little bit too mechanistic. In the sense that I think the elements that are described here are correct, which is to say there is a very strong religious aspect to these claims, right? They are immune to challenge because for the same reason that religious claims are immune to challenge.
It's faith, man.
The fact that you're challenging it says there's something wrong with you.
Right.
But it is not exactly a religion, right? And the absence of metaphysical claims, explicit metaphysical claims, puts it in an adjacent category at best.
Well, McWhorter has really written so beautifully about this a number of times, but I suspect, I can't remember what he does exactly, but as a linguist, I'm sure he gets somewhere in this territory that we basically, okay, so religion is like one instantiation of some bigger category. So rather than say like, okay, this thing is adjacent, maybe that's so, but the Venn diagram needs the larger categorical description of the thing that includes religion and social justice and perhaps Marxism and a number of other things, all of which have these, I don't know what it would be, 6, 8, 20, whatever, descriptors.
Well, I agree with that, but I would say the larger category, and I don't remember what McWhorter uses as the larger category. The larger category I would use is literally false, metaphorically true. And remember, literally false, metaphorically true is about advancing an evolutionary agenda.
No, I don't think that's right. Literally false, metaphorically true is important and critical, and we can approach those things and say, so I can see why kosher laws and why it's not the story you tell, but why it's important, and can be assessed and agreed with or not from outside or from inside. Whereas the religion part of this, which is its own ecosystem, like a claim that is literally false and metaphorically true is just a claim, but this is, we're talking about the whole ecosystem. So I don't think literally false, metaphorically true is the bigger category.
Well, I'm not sure I understand the objection you just leveled. My point would be the people advancing these claims are rapidly increasing in their power to shape civilization to their own ends.
Yes.
That the claims are nonsense, right?
Yes.
But they are advancing in power, and so I would say that does roughly meet the definition. Now, ultimately, they will be unstable, but let's just put it this way. Literally false, metaphorically true is a broad category that can be applied to, let's say, scientific beliefs. A belief in gravitational potential energy is such a belief, right? If you act as if you believe it, you can calculate all sorts of things that you can't calculate if you disbelieve it, but there isn't any evidence for it. Mm-hmm.
But so the distinction I'm making, and I think it's actually critical, is it's analogous to an individual versus population level analysis. That a tenet of religion might be literally false, metaphorically true, much as a tenet of a scientific worldview might be literally false, metaphorically true. But the actual religion, the actual worldview is the population level, which is not just, it has emergent properties that include not just a collection of these tenets, but also some additional structure.
Okay. You're right. Under normal circumstances, the belief structure would accompany a lineage, which is the reason that the ecosystem level analysis isn't the right one, because the evolutionary entity actually is an evolutionary entity.
I meant to say there, I'm going to back off the use of the word ecosystem and go back to individual versus population,
right?
Here, both of which are
evolutionary entities.
Yes.
Except in this case, the population isn't an evolutionary entity, which is why I've argued it's unstable and will come apart in the end.
In this case, social justice or
social
religion,
justice.
like any
social justice.
Okay, so you then are also taking issue with it's not exactly religion. There is something less stable because of the lack of lineage.
Oh yeah.
I'm asking, is that your
because the
claim?
Internal dynamics in which one lineage turns on the other will ultimately tear the thing apart from the inside, guaranteed. Mm-hmm. Right. So,
yeah.
In any case, the falseness of the claims are paired with a strategy that is highly successful at gaining power. This is temporary, but that doesn't rule it out. Mm-hmm. The difficulty in spotting it probably does have to do with the fact that it isn't explicitly metaphysical.
Yeah, no, I think that's insightful. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think the thing that in the question that is hard for me to accept is that our built-in resistance. I don't know that we have a built-in resistance. The built-in resistance, to the extent it exists at all, has to do with the fact that there are, to the extent you dispense with a claim that is no longer functional, you have an advantage. And so, in this very short time window, that's not the case. These people have the advantage, and that's what's going on.
Okay. Next is just a comment. I'm going to read it because here it is. Shabbat Shalom. Bret, please reach out to the mods of the Facebook group. It's at 2,000 members, and the mods need your help. Thanks for the excellent content.
Please reach out to.
Yes.
Okay.
What did you think?
I thought you said please reject, and I was like, what the heck is going on? All right. Please reach out to the mods. All right.
Next question. I'm an engineer at a large OEM.
Original equipment manufacturer.
All right. Both the Y chromosome types in the room had that at the tips of their tongues.
It was new old stock.
What's that?
It was new old stock. NOS.
Oh, goodness. I'm an engineer at a large OEM, which depends on federal contracts and which is forcing CRT on its employees, myself included. What can we do to expand the Trump administration's anti-CRT memo to include companies with contracts with the federal government?
I think you've just answered your own question, which is the funding can be made contingent. I don't know what you can do, but to the extent.
So, I mean, obviously, there are risks to, I mean, in this case, I would want that, right?
Yep.
I think this ideology is so dangerous. But once you establish a way for the federal government to decide what can and cannot be taught or said across things that are beyond the scope of the actual federal government, we get at least into slippery slope territory of potential overreach.
I don't think so. I mean,
Okay, why not?
the route for government abuse is there.
Yes.
But the point that is so central here is that, look, abuse is always a possibility, right? Abuse of power. But the entire informal nature of all of this is taking the governmental protections against abuse and sidelining them. So, for example, when you establish an administrative position at a college whose purpose is to ensure diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Which I'm not going to do, incidentally.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
But this happened while we were at Evergreen.
Yes, it did.
While we were at Evergreen, affirmative action was illegal in the state of Washington. This was an affirmative action program.
So that should have been prevented by the laws that were already on the books.
It at least circumvented those laws, because it would have been inconceivable to hire somebody who was not intersectional into that position. Likewise, I would say these departments, right? They are circumventing the protections against discrimination. And so is there the potential for governmental abuse? Yes, we've just seen some of this, the Supreme Court decision on trans rights and the protection. The Supreme Court just issued a decision bringing trans people in on protections, and plausibly the decision might force the inclusion of, for example, trans women in sports.
I don't know.
It doesn't matter. The point is,
this sounds like something I should know about, and I can't speak to it because I just don't know at this point.
The potential for abuse exists. But the point is, at your university or at your corporation, when people with power start forcing other people to say stuff and teach stuff and things like that, there's no mechanism to challenge it. At least at the governmental level, there is a process by which we can say, is it fair to bar this?
Right. I mean, we don't disagree on any of the particulars here. I'm just concerned about desiring more federal input into decisions in private corporations.
I would say it the other way. I would say that the only prevention of some false belief system taking over and forcing its way through your institutions is protections against that at the governmental level, where there's a process to establish this is actually a fact and that isn't, right?
Yeah, I mean, there will be, for any one of these, there will be someone on one side that says we absolutely need this or else democracy will fail, and someone on the other side who says we absolutely can't have this or else democracy will fail. And we feel certain from as many domains as we could possibly have that this particular critical race theory, woke ideology, et cetera, is actually an existential threat at the societal level.
Yep.
But that doesn't mean that once you have some power that has been instantiated for this particular example, that it can't be used badly elsewhere.
I agree. And this is the kind of thing that libertarians are constantly saying, who will watch the watchers. But my sense is we're stuck with that because it's better than the alternative, which is no process at all. Yeah. And so there we are.
Okay. Would you agree that Kendi and D'Angelo took a kernel of truth and grew a very misshapen crop? Perhaps people have racist impulses which they resist. Say the reptilian brain seeks a tribalism which higher function must rebuke.
You're not suggesting appointing Kendi and D'Angelo the kernel of truth. For one thing, they would be kernels of truth, I believe. I know, you're going to tell me it's spelled differently.
I would, but I won't bother because you already did it for me.
Yeah, there's a kernel of truth.
Yeah,
there.
and I want to say no, actually. Like there are some. D'Angelo, I think, correctly diagnoses her own personal problem, and then extrapolates to every other person who shares her skin color, and that extrapolation is wrong.
Right.
So that kernel of truth in that case is Robin DiAngelo turns out to be a racist. Like, she just has racist thoughts, and she is embarrassed by them, and she's decided to make bank on that embarrassment. Kendi seems to be, and I have not finished the one book that I am willing to read of his, and I don't think I need to put myself through any more of that, but I'm still not done with it. But Kendi, I'm not even sure. Like, he has true observations about past and even current examples of racism, but the leap that he then makes to anti-racism is equality of outcome and everything else is racist doesn't even connect. So there's not even like I don't think that the examples of racism that are true, that are the kernels of truth, would grow into the crop that he makes. So it's not even there's not even a connection.
But I don't think so. Okay, I mean, what we're disagreeing over then is the question about the kernel of truth and the continuity between that and the thing that they ultimately arrive at.
That's my objection to seeing to this framing for Kendi at any rate, and then for D'Angelo, it's for her. I see how she got there for her, but then she extrapolates and no, you can't claim that you are everyone because you're not.
Right, but the kernel of truth is that there are, these are both numbskulls who have.
Kendi's no numbskull. I think D'Angelo actually probably just isn't very bright, but Kendi's clearly quite smart.
I'm not saying he's not smart.
Yeah.
I still think he's a numbskull for pulling this on us because it ultimately
I'd go with
will.
Asshole.
All right, fair enough.
Yeah.
But the point is, people like D'Angelo exist.
Yeah.
So her extrapolation to it's all of us is clearly absurd. But the kernel of truth is, there's some low-level thing that exists in some fraction of the population.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And in Kendi's case, there is a activity against racism, an active activity against racism that is warranted. And I will use an example from my own life. When we were teaching, I used to be very conscious about the fact that if I was looking for an example of a person engaged in a behavior, and I just Googled for somebody to put together a lecture, if I Googled, love, right, or couple, I would just get a sea of white people, right? And so I would actively search for something that didn't come out of that sea of white people just so that my examples
Not
circulated.
Always, but sometimes.
Well,
it's not that you never used white examples.
No, I attempted to equalize the thing so that my students did not have the sense of like, oh, this is a lecture about humor in white people. It's like
in the case of love or humor, which are human universals, your examples should actually be reflective of the background demographics of humanity.
Right, which turns out to be
in that case. But this like in the case of, for instance, software engineers, you don't have to make all of your examples, 1-to-1 male to female, because actually, no, that background demographic is not going to be a match, and that's not because patriarchy.
And it turns out to be a diminishing returns problem. If you try to obligate yourself to deliver a set of lectures that has no racial bias in it, like you'll spend the rest of your life trying to build it. It can't be done because, for one thing, even if you try to correct it through Google, to the extent you use search terms, it
becomes your full-time job, which is exactly what we're seeing it becoming for many people.
Right. And I should tell you, I talked to my students about this at some point, and they pointed out that there were that if you Googled things from different places, you got different racial biases in the results.
You mean from different ISPs or?
Yeah, from different nations. I've used the VPN.
Oh.
So anyway, you could see the wheels turning inside of the thing. But anyway, the point is, if you want to give a lecture on the nature of humor, I actually think it's much better to find Kung people laughing than it is to find,
in order in part to point out the universality.
Exactly.
Because if you're talking to a bunch of American undergraduates, they know that people in Manhattan can laugh.
Right.
And they don't necessarily understand that it is universal. And this, frankly, is the cure, in part, for racism.
Right. So I think the important end growth of this is you do want somebody in our position to make a good faith effort to deliver something that's maximally educational, and that means does not feed people's inherent biases about these concepts.
Yeah.
But do you want the right for people to wag their finger at you if you do put a white person on the screen? They say, aha, why'd you do that? Right? You don't. You want everybody to make a good faith effort to be properly inclusive, and you do not want some power structure empowered to look over your shoulder and, seek errors.
Yeah. Okay. Next one is just a comment. There is no way to not feed the crazed left. All stories have forced conclusions for them. If you can't talk, then you fight. They won't allow us to talk to them. A fight is coming. Trump 2020. Stay safe, guys.
I agree with some of this.
Yeah, I do too.
Do not feed the crazed left. And
he says there is no way to not feed the crazed left.
Well, I think what he's saying is other than fight. And I agree that at some level one must fight, but that it's not nuanced enough because there are a great many people who giving people an alternative is important. And so a lot of the people who are espousing this stuff superficially in order to keep themselves safe are not actually consumed by it and reaching a hand out to those who can be reached is both strategically smart and ethically right. Yeah. But yes, a fight is coming, clearly.
We're at about 40 minutes.
Oh, well, we got to get through a few more of these.
Okay.
Oh, actually, sorry, this is the second part of a question from the same person. Like a child. No, these two are two parts of one question. I lost where I was for a moment. Thoughts on Antifa, Black Lives Matter, and Black Bloc using the same weaponized control the narrative tools learned from the mainstream media in order to influence public opinion. It's now justified as a taste of your own medicine argument in the defense of their actions. It's like a child reanimating abusive parental behavior. Please speak to altering the child's behavior while the parent is still acting abusively. Thank you both for being brave, mature, intelligent adults. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with this. The
yeah,
taste
I
of
do
your
too.
own medicine thing is, in fact, you've chosen the perfect example, right? To the
Yes.
extent that somebody is abused and that triggers abusive tendencies in them, that's understandable. But who gets abused? It's not the people who abused them. It's not a taste of your own medicine. It's inflicting it on another generation of people.
Well, and the way he ends before the gratitude for which we are ourselves grateful. Please speak to altering the child's behavior while the parent is still acting abusively. And I think this is the mess we're in everywhere we turn. That trying to get people to start acting honorably when they can easily point to, and usually people don't have the sort of ordered thought processes to carefully point, but they're sort of thrashing about, going, but the thing that I'm objecting to is still going on. How dare you expect me to stop? And this, this is some of the rhetoric that we're hearing, even from, the like Antifa, Black Lives Matter, Black Bloc, and even if some of their examples aren't true and the narrative isn't what they say it is, and all of this, are they reacting to something real? Have they been handed a bad deal? Has a whole generation of Americans been handed a deal that doesn't look like the one that people used to get handed? Yeah, they have. And it's not necessarily incumbent on them to understand everything that they have had to contend with, in part because their parents and the drugs they were given and the schools they went to and the screens they were sat in front of broke them sufficiently that they don't have an ability to some degree to actually diagnose themselves.
Yep, I agree. For another time, we should talk about a broader view of this, where meritocracy coupled with a brutal lack of a safety net results in a certain number of people who don't have any reason to defend a meritocratic system because they will be on the losing end of it. So yes, these people were miseducated and betrayed by a medical system that drugged them and all of that. Mm-hmm. But it should not be surprising that those who don't see themselves as winning in a meritocratic system attack it.
Yeah, that's right. Ignoring facts that conflict with a desire to truth is widespread. What's the solution? You see it with Ted Wheeler, but also at Boeing management with 737 MAX. Do you know this example?
Trying to remember it.
I don't know the example at all.
I was aware of it, but I can't resurrect it.
But what's the solution to ignoring facts that conflict with the desired truth?
Well, the solution is the alignment of incentives, right? The fact is a system
that's right.
that causes you to pay the price for ignoring facts that you had at your disposal is a good one. And so, just to take one example, red teams that have an incentive to find the weakness in the structure you have built incentivize you not to build a weak structure.
So this is a term of art in engineering or something?
Yeah, I think it's mostly in computer security.
Okay.
But it can be in anything, right? You have a red team that is going to try to exploit your security for your building, right? Can you get in? You make it a game where they win if they get in, and then you find out if you've got a flaw.
Yep.
And we need intellectual red teams too. This is why I say you should never allow one school of thought to take over a field. At the very least, you need the next best school of thought there to keep them honest. Otherwise, they're all going to go crazy, which they do.
It's the loyal opposition.
The loyal opposition, right?
Formalized.
There.
Yeah. Yep. Our declawed, not by me, cat sharpened her claws on a cardboard edge. Why? Instinct? Habit unlikely. Haven't seen it before.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, the idea that you can declaw cats is new, and I hope it's new, and don't do it. Like, really horrifying, and I appreciate that the person asking the question says it wasn't by her. I think it basically is moving, it's both honing the nails, the claws, and getting the muscles working well.
I've always imagined that it has something to do with causing the claw to curve. That basically there's like it'd be like the process by which plants bend towards the light. That actually, in this case, attention.
Putting pressure. Oh.
But in any case, why does a cat do it if it doesn't have claws? Well, presumably there's something wired in where the cat experiments with this behavior and discovers, oh, that feels really good.
Yeah. And it feels good because when they do have claws, it helps them, maybe it's get the right curve. Maybe, I don't know, maybe claws are a little bit like teeth and they're actually sort of connected by ligaments such that, getting the right pressure on them makes them stronger and aligned right, whether or not they're shaped right. But whatever it does for them, it does something that selection wants to encourage more of. And so it feels good. And so the feels good circuit persists even when the claws don't.
Yep. I can see the cat in your lap. He disbelieves all of this.
Yeah.
Thinks it's wrong.
He just wants more cream.
Yeah.
Okay. Do short-lived species such as mice adapt better to changing circumstances because of greater generational turnover? If so, is there any evolutionary advantage to being a very long-lived species?
Short-lived species. Oh.
No, none. That's why there are no long-lived species. You heard it here first.
Yes. This is a great question. You're not going to see where it's going. But here's the thing. Yes, your instinct is right. Our mammalian immune system provides a very interesting example that more or less proves your point. It's the exception that proves the rule in the correct version of the use of that phrase. Your immune system evolves on an hourly basis. If you are challenged by a pathogen, you actually have evolution taking place in the specific immunity, that is to say, the cells that respond to the pathogen, which is how you ultimately defeat it. So in a sense, your pathogen is a very short-lived species that evolves very rapidly to parasitize you. You are a very long-lived species, which makes you a sitting target, right? In order to be a sitting target and persist for a long life, you have a subsystem of you that evolves on the same scale as the pathogen so that you can beat it, right? Because basically you have microbes that are evolving to counteract other microbes and viruses and things. So yes, you would be probably unable to live a long life as an animal. A plant can do this in a different way, basically by, a plant can drop a limb and not die because the plant is not composed of vital organs in the same way. So an animal, in order to not die of being a sitting target in a world of pathogens, has a subsystem that evolves on the same time scale, proving your point.
Great. Okay, we'll do one more here. and then go on to Super Chat from this hour. I will say that there's another question here advising you to reach out to the mods of the Facebook group. So from a different person. So something is going on there. Dangerous question. How is encouraging medical transition for trans people any different from encouraging breast implants, etc., for women with body dysmorphia? Good faith reason the former is okay, but not the latter? Question mark.
This is a tough one. I would say there's a distinction. I have a sense that the body dysmorphia in straight women, presumably.
You mean non-trans women?
The women who are getting breast implants because of body dysmorphia, I believe, are in large measure responding to a advertising and media apparatus that is making them insecure about something they needn't be insecure about, because that enriches those who are making them insecure. And so we are creating a pathology, and they are remedying that pathology with an augmentation. And at some level, the right answer to that is not the augmentation, it's the refiguring things so that making other people insecure is not a profitable business model.
Yeah, I mean, the borders of the categories will always be hard to know exactly where they are, always. But with regard to women getting plastic surgery of any sort to better fit their, the beauty norms that they perceive as the ones that they want to better fit, is largely market driven and advertising driven. And some of what is going on with trans and the orders of magnitude rise in the number of, for instance, teenage girls who are declaring themselves trans would appear also to be some combination of social contagion and encouragement from larger society who are jumping on the bandwagon for reasons that we won't go into right now, but can and probably will elsewhere. So those two kinds of desire to change your body, I think, are actually very similar. Whereas trans is real, and there are cases where people really do have such a mismatch in their heads between what they feel themselves to be and what they were born as. And I think it is an honorable and fair thing to do as a society to allow such people to have a match between their brains and their bodies. But it is a tiny minority of humans, and it is also, I would say, a tiny minority of people who are currently describing themselves as trans.
Yeah, I would say we also don't have a tremendous amount of information on, as you say, trans is real. And until recently, surgical interventions and pharmaceutical interventions would have been impossible.
Right.
And many cultures make allowances for trans people that legitimize them in their original form. And I guess the question is, are we doing people a greater service by experimenting with surgery and pharmaceuticals, or would we be better off just figuring out, how to, bring them fully into the protections and understanding of society?
Right. No, that would be the more honorable move. I'm sure of it. Okay. Next question from this hour. The dictionary has changed the definition of female and male to include gender identity. How can we defend against this type of newspeak? So I'll bet it has. I'd love a reference. I'd love to know which dictionary we're talking about. Although I believe at least some dictionaries have begun to. I know a couple months ago there was a move to change the definition of racism in Webster's, I believe, and Webster said, sure, why not? Can't see what's going to happen downstream of this decision. How can we defend against this type of newspeak? I mean, I think we're trying to do it, and we're trying in part, it's not most of what we're doing, but in part by having conversations between us that are unscripted and real, and the kinds of conversations that we have, at least sometimes when we're not on camera, to give to you watching and listening some of the language that will allow you to push back in conversation. I don't know what the pushback against the dictionary changing will look like, but those changes happen because there is a widespread acceptance, and the widespread acceptance happens because in conversation, people who disagree are quiet, and people who disagree being quiet is in part because they're scared, but it's also in part because they're not really sure. They know it doesn't feel right. Wait, male and female are biological sex. This is real, but they don't have the certainty of their own footing to defend themselves against frankly, the crazy that comes at them. So part of what we're trying to do, I think, we haven't ever talked about this, but is to share language that other people can use to discuss these things with people when it comes up.
Yep. I would say there is an argument that the market should solve the dictionary thing. And the problem is that those who are fighting to poison language are trying to stigmatize entities that attempt to give you higher quality definitions.
Yep.
So we have to figure out how to protect those entities. But I would just add one other thing that I think we are doing, and I think this was something that we did a lot as professors, was demonstrating that what we are saying is part of a worldview that if you just kind of let it interact, makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, you could come up with some of the things that we claim are true, and they could just exist in isolation. But if you tried to have a conversation based on those premises, it would fall apart.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, what we're talking about is part of a deep toolkit of understanding that's well tested. And the question is, well, all right, how comfortable would you be at their table if you were trans? Could you sit at their table and listen to this conversation as you were trans? And the fact is, we've had lots of trans students and interacted with them very easily and comfortably.
Yep.
And so the point is, when extrapolated from, this worldview holds up in light of true variation.
Yeah.
Right? Which
Yep.
is an important thing to demonstrate.
Next question. Heather, could you come please share some of your exercises for teaching math to children? Thanks a lot. You're both heroes. Be blessed. Yeah, I don't, I'd be happy to share some of how I have taught math, and I have, the work that mostly when I have taught math, it's been to undergraduates, which are usually not the people I think of when people say children, but, of course, there's an argument to be made there. Let me think. I have to think on how to answer this question, and probably it warrants just having something written out and shared. But one thing that is absolutely true is just pointing out the math in daily life and pointing out its power and beauty everywhere. And so, when we're going somewhere with the children, talking about how far we're going and whether or not how far actually, the number of miles on a bike actually is a full measure of how hard it is and what that means. What, number of miles doesn't necessarily track to how difficult. So what other things might you measure? What other things might you be counting and keeping track of? This is easy to do in the kitchen, where if you take a recipe that is using sort of an American standard of, for instance, weight, or rather volume, and you want to use weight, and you want to double it, you say to the kid, okay, this calls for 2 cups of flour and there's 5 ounces of flour in a cup, and we're going to double the recipe. How many ounces of flour do we need? You just start making it backgrounded. Like you just start. I am grateful to have never heard from either of our children, what use will math be to me? I cannot imagine ever uttering those words myself, and I would have felt quite a failure if either of them had ever said that. Not to say that either of them enjoyed everything that I did to them or every time I threw math at them, but just making it part of the background and part of the fun is a big way to do it.
I would just add something else that I know your dad did with you and you now do with our kids, which is there's kind of an understanding that the purpose of math is not to get to the answer so you can stop doing it, right? So
Yeah.
The fact that you can get to the answer doesn't really mean anything if you don't know how it was that it worked, that you got there.
Mm-hmm.
And so going through some other way to get there in order that you can see what the process meant and why is the key to understanding it and treating it other than a take your medicine kind of endeavor.
Yeah. And this is part of the, it's also about the journey, but also the journey is fun. The journey isn't a slog.
And I guess I would just say one other thing.
Mm-hmm.
I am still stunned by my own experience in college with calculus, right? I had calculus from 2 different teachers. And one of them, who was not well liked, I thought was absolutely phenomenal, because at the board, he just took a joy in illustrating why things would function the way they did and showing us how to do things. And it totally worked for me.
Mm-hmm.
And the other one, who was pretty well liked, was very mechanical. And it was just very hard to care, right? Because it was just simply a matter of, here's how you do that, right?
Recipe. Yeah.
Right.
Terrible.
So anyway, it's all about incentives. And to the extent that the person up there is motivated by the right stuff and can convey the joy of doing these things properly, that's the hardest part, right? The math itself isn't that hard. It's the, getting you oriented to it correctly and knowing that you want to go through it because what you get at the other side is rewarding. That's the important part.
Yeah, no, that's right. And I do remember bringing math homework home when I was a kid and having my dad look at how I was being told to do things in the late 70s, and him just kind of, oh, for God's sake, no! This, you're not going to memorize a bunch of stuff. There will be no way that at the end of doing this you will understand the beauty and the truth of the math. You will only know how to do this current thing that is fashionable, which frankly, math isn't about fashion. Sorry. No.
Yeah, he was shaking his head analog back before it had become an online thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was. Okay, I was going to say something else, but you just put that right in there. Yep. I don't remember what it was. Okay, what is the best Star Trek series, and why is it Deep Space Nine? Says Holly Math Nerd.
Deep Space Nine is the one in the space station where nothing ever happens. Why would that be the best one?
So we have to admit that we enjoy Star Trek, but haven't watched much of it, and I don't honestly remember. I don't have an opinion on this.
In the space station where nothing ever happens. So.
Well, but do you have an answer to the first part of the question? I mean, obviously,
why is Star Trek the best series?
Why is the best Star Trek? What is the best Star Trek series, and why is it Deep Space Nine?
Well, I
couldn't even name them all. I mean, I couldn't even name more than 2, honestly.
I
at the
think
moment.
Holly is clear. This is a backdoor to meditation. The fact that nothing happens in Deep Space Nine makes it more contemplative.
This is a wink to the Buddhists.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Good one, Holly.
Yeah. No, I can't imagine what you're thinking, actually. But okay.
And I don't know enough. We should probably watch some more Star Trek.
I'm not watching Deep Space Nine.
Wow. Okay. At my university, Student Org is pressuring faculty to have mandatory anti-racism courses and training. They are surprisingly effective at organizing and lobbying. How can regular people push back? So you don't say, Sam Jam, author of this question, if you are a student or faculty. And the answer, it's hard either way for sure. But the answer is somewhat different depending on which position you're in. What?
I'm just thinking that, literature has everything to teach us about this. And there's this, I unfortunately was not prepared for this question, but in Catch-22, there is a scene in which the pilots are being instructed in some way, and one of them causes havoc by asking some question like, when is now, why is right, and where are the Snowdens of yesteryear? And so you might take that kind of approach. In seriousness, you might take the approach of asking good-natured but impossible to field questions and then letting the thing collapse of its own accord. I think if I had it to do
but you know
over
what? You are the master of this, and it's really hard for the rest of us to either. It's one of two things, like to come up with the thing that will effectively be the stick in the gears, right?
Yep.
In real time, or if you come up with it, like imagining saying it with a straight face, like just like getting it out of your mouth. Like I've been in that position. I've learned enough from you in this regard that I can sometimes come up with exactly the thing I might say, and then I'm going to burst out laughing. Like there's no way I can do this with a straight face. So you have to hone the skill.
You got to hone it. But it's worth honing, especially if you're going to be subjected to this nonsense. So see if you can't perfect it, and just you want to just lob the question that causes the thing to reveal itself. right? To the extent that you can learn that, you will find it is a delightful exercise.
Yeah. And I haven't gotten there yet, but I think the last chapter of Helen Pluckrose and James Lindsay's book, Cynical Theories, actually gets at some things that they are saying you can do to push back against this. And so I said I haven't gotten there in the book yet, but I imagine that it's got some very good advice, and I got there from having just listened to Megan Daum's latest podcast, which is a conversation with Helen Pluckrose, and it's quite good. So even just listening to that hour of conversation between Megan and Helen on Megan's new podcast, which is called The Unspeakable, I think, The Unspeakable Podcast, is quite good. And she has one particular piece of advice that I can't remember at the moment, but maybe it'll come to me as we're answering other questions. Okay. To what extent is political ideology hereditary? What evolutionary advantages are there to different proto-political ideologies?
What evolutionary advantages are there to different proto-political ideologies? So here's the problem. Every time you raise the question of heredity or hereditary or heritability, you run into the same predicament, which is that these words have a meaning in common parlance that has a relationship to their technical meaning, but the relationship is not straightforward. So, to what extent is it heritable? Do you mean genetically? Because heritable is a genetic phenomenon. Technically, it shouldn't be, because there are multiple pathways for heredity. And to the extent that you include something like cultural heredity, then it is highly heritable. The household you grew up in has a lot to say about what you end up thinking, though probably not at all transmitted on a genetic pathway. And I would say, if I can just cite Eric here for a second, a long time ago, Eric and I were talking about the problem of these wrong beliefs that are very powerful, politically powerful. And he said, truth is the second best strategy, which is one of the smartest things anybody's ever said to me. And the meaning was instantly clear in the context of our conversation. What it means is some of us default to truth as a mechanism for getting through the world, right? It doesn't mean we're right, but it means that we seek to be right because that provides you with some power. But it's not the best route to power at all. The best route to power is affiliation with something, and that thing can be saying totally wrong stuff, but if it's powerful, it will carry you along with it. And so what is the evolutionary advantage to different proto-political ideologies? Some of those political ideologies may be inventing something marvelous. In other words, the American experiment is really about creating opportunity that is broadly distributed and that does not pay attention to what lineage you come from. That's a great idea, and it was very powerful, and maybe it will be again. So signing up for that political ideology is a noble thing to do. On the other hand, signing up for woke ideology that's going to tear that all down in order to get some stuff is a terrible idea, but it's powerful. And so the advantage is power. But the question is, what is the basis of the power? Is the power derived honorably because the system discovers good stuff and distributes it? Or is the power derived falsely by stealing stuff and corralling well-being, for example?
Good. Have you heard of Parker Crutchfield's morality pill to make people complacent to lockdown measures? Suggested adding it to water supplies. Thoughts? I'm not sure. I heard about one that was microdosing with psilocybin. I don't know if this is that. Either way, either this is that or this is something else. Adding stuff to water supplies seems a really, really dangerous game. Mm-hmm. Another time we can talk about fluoride and why that itself was likely a very dangerous game. But the idea of drugging the population against their will, not so much. No, really terrible idea. Now, if this is the same thing that I'm thinking of, which is suggesting basically people microdosing on something like psilocybin in order to deal with justified anxiety from the state of the world, there are potentially large advantages to that, but it has to be on an opt-in basis.
Yeah,
it has to be.
I would agree.
Bret, your idea of a place advertising its hospitality to those escaping the devolving West Coast is good. What is stopping existing or new educational institutions from doing the same to those escaping our broken academy? Oh my God, yeah. I mean, we've talked about this so much, and even the University of Chicago.
Yeah.
Even the University of Chicago, with its statement of the Chicago Statement of Principles, I can't remember what it's called now, has begun to cave to some of this woke ideology. And it just seems so obvious that there are so many would-be college students out there and so many parents of would-be college students out there who are interested in paying tuition to a school that isn't woke, that would be flocking to a school that was pushing back against this, that maybe if you were the 200th institution to declare yourself and actually follow through on not being woke, that you wouldn't attract a flood of students. But I think even if you were the 200th institution to do that, you would, certainly if you were in the first 10. Like, why doesn't any one of the number of now struggling because of COVID, as if they weren't struggling enough already, liberal arts colleges or even R1 universities make a stand and be firm about it? And I think then watch the applications and then tuition dollars pour in.
Yeah. So the fact that this strategy seems like it would be such a slam dunk that, any college president who figured out how to pull it off would be heralded as a genius and a great hero of the institution and all of that, and yet they don't, tells you something about the horizontal nature of this revolution. The point is, inside of each institution, there is enough firepower to drive out or destroy anybody who tries it. So every institution goes over the edge rather than it spreading from the top of institution to institution. It's spreading horizontally within them. And I guess I should just add that that's not a good thing.
Oh, I thought you were advocating for it.
No, quite the opposite.
Okay, no, I guess we're on the same page now.
You are at 1 hour and 12 minutes.
Okay, let's do 4 more. Ibram X. Kendi is giving a Zoom presentation at my university this week. What should I ask him? I want to be respectful, but push back on Kafka traps. So again, it's different if you're a student, a faculty, or admin. If you're a student, in this case, I would say you actually have a little bit more freedom, a little bit more leverage to be a little bit pushier with him. If you're faculty or admin, you might end up behind the scenes getting metaphorically beaten up for pushing back on the sage of the day. Go on.
Well, I would ask him, and mind you, I have not read his book, but I would ask him whether or not there was an end point, how you would know when you reached it, and if there is no end point, how this isn't simply, even if we follow his prescription, going to result in an equally unfair, terrible, unstable, and dangerous situation on the far end of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess actually I'm remembering now what Helen Pluckrose said in this conversation with Megan Daum. And it has to do with saying, I don't know the politics of the person asking, but Helen is speaking as a liberal. And she says, I don't know what we should call them, but in this case, Kendi, speaking for anti-racism, a term that he has defined, don't speak for all of us on the left in any way. And so if you're a liberal, you could do what Helen suggests and say, look, I am also, grateful for all of the many wins that liberalism experienced in the 20th century, for civil rights and for women's rights and disability rights and, freedom of religion, including not having any religion, all of this. And I have a very different understanding of how best to continue to make progress. And that different understanding does not make me the enemy. And if you think that it does, then, and this, I don't think Helen says this, but this is sort of where I would take it. If you think that my different understanding of how we might get to what you say you would claim are our shared goals, then I would suggest that maybe the goals that you have are not the ones that you say they are.
Nice. That's really good.
The next one merely says meow. I've still got the kitty in my lap, so we'll do 3 more after that because that was an easy one. What's your opinion on the idea that the struggles and adversity of adventuring out of Africa in part makes up the disparity of IQ differences? Well, the premise is not one that we are going to agree with, but even if you accepted the premise, I would say it misunderstands what Africa is. Africa is not a little plot of land in which things are easygoing, and you have to leave it before things get difficult. Africa is a giant continent with many, many different types of ecosystems, and Darwin's hostile forces live in all of its forms in Africa as well. So the idea that moving between continents is the thing that makes you smart isn't a very savvy argument.
Yeah. I just think there's nothing to it.
Yeah. And I mean, really, like if that were true, you would predict that the people who ended up in Tierra del Fuego would be the smartest of all because they traveled the farthest across the most domain changes. Right.
Yep.
Right. Okay. Penultimate question. Elysium Health, a startup with PhDs, claims that their NAD plus supplements activate sirtuins and promote, quote, cellular health and healthy aging. Is this BS, unverified, or supported by science?
Sure sounds like BS to me.
Yeah, I feel like I've heard of these people, and I can't pull up more than I feel like I've heard of these people at the moment without looking it up. But yeah, it sounds like BS,
So I think the key thing is this. If you're deficient in something, it can cause ill health. If you've got some pathway and upregulating it makes you more healthy, why isn't it being upregulated, right? So there can be answers to this question, but in general, the idea that you have read some paper in which some pathway is involved in some healthy thing and some corporation decides it's going to trigger that pathway and then say, aha, we've found the key to more health. It just never pans out in terms of the data.
Even if they got good graphics, though?
Well, really good graphics go kind of a long way.
Yeah. And a good brand name?
Yeah. So anyway, I think, there's a smell test here. And there are loopholes, right? There are things about us that are rigged suboptimally because of some environment we came from. My go-to example would be we are rigged very stupidly for cold. When we go into the cold, our capillaries shut down in order to protect our core and preserve heat because our ancestors didn't have enough food. Whereas we could up ratchet the circulation to the extremities. We could pump heat into them, and then you could eat more at dinner, and you'd be great. But we don't do it, and so we risk frostbite, and we become inept, and all of these things in the cold that are needless.
Yeah, for the modern overfed human, it would be win-win. You don't experience the cold, and you get to eat more without getting fat.
Right, and in fact, if we could turn down our discomfort at being in the cold, it's the go-to way to burn extra calories. But the problem is you're wired not to do it because your ancestors didn't have enough food, and so the point is spending energy keeping yourself warm is something you're wired to avoid at all costs. It's like physiological laziness, but that's what it is.
Yep.
It's physiological laziness. So anyway, there are places where there's a loophole that, if we could figure out how to turn down our sensitivity to cold and upregulate our circulation in light of cold rather than bring it to the core, that'd be great. In general, these things are hard to do, right? For the same reason it's hard to do things like turn down appetite by interfering with the chemical pathways involved. But anyway, there are possibilities, but in general, these things are nonsense.
Yep. Okay. The next two are also comments, and then we'll get to one last question before we stop for the day. Just enjoying the discussion, want to donate. I'll formulate questions at some point. I have many. Love the pod. Thank you. Hello, and thank you both for the fantastic work that you do. I'm a professional artist and would love to assist with Unity 2020 and your work in some way. Much love to you both. I don't know if you have like a email to suggest to the artist who would be interested in.
Come sign up, and there's an onboarding process, and we can put you in touch with our Slack team that makes art. Anyway, it's a good thing to do.
Great. Okay. One last question. Yeah. One last question for today. Ooh, at a considerable donation. Thank you. I turn to the outdoors during these times, but I'm also drawn more and more to pornography and alcohol. What advice do you have to lessen my consumption of these? It's not an addiction, but it may be becoming a habit. I don't like it, but oddly hard to stop. These activities seem to creep up. That's a terrifically worded question as well, and I appreciate your distinction between addiction and habit. Habits are things we should all enable ourselves to form when they are good and to try to stop when they are bad, but at what point do they become addictions? You had something.
Well, I would say one thing that, we talked a little bit about addiction and our broken model of it on a past live stream.
Yeah.
One thing is better options are the key to avoiding addiction. All right. So to the extent that you have more entertaining things to do, you will tend not to default to the stuff that you feel is destructive. In the case of porn, it's probably, you don't say enough about what your relationship status is to know, but to the extent that it scratches an itch that if you had to work harder by interacting with people to scratch the same itch, you would end up more rewarded because you would be interacting with them in a way that had a proper challenge to it and all.
During lockdown,
That's
if
the
you don't
problem.
have a relationship, it might be very hard to know how to proceed.
Yeah.
Right.
I think the thing, I don't know if I've said this anywhere yet, but the thing about porn is that it gets in the way. It is a consumer solution to a ability to generate fantasy internally. And so at some level, you're denying yourself something and exposing yourself to the hazard of what the market wants you to be fantasizing about. And you'd be far better off to just say, this is blocking a cognitively productive activity. I know it's a weird thing to say about it.
But you're making an argument that sounds superficially similar to a familiar argument, but it's actually quite different. So the argument that many people will have heard a lot of places is that you end up seeing this sort of menu of options that are actually mostly not, at least for women, what women want to be engaging in, but this is now what's in men's heads, for instance, about what it is that they think good sexual activity looks like. And you are saying not just does it put these wrong things on a menu, but it actually having a menu at all, being handed a menu, makes it less easy for you to create your own sexual life and explore whatever your own sexual fantasies might be, such that you actually may live an impoverished, a sexually impoverished fantasy and actual sexual life forever after, because you thought from the beginning that it was about a menu, that it was about someone handing you something, that sexuality was about market forces, that narrative was about market forces in the case of a slightly related concept. And I think that's apt.
I think it's good. I want to add two things to it. One, you had an excellent piece come out in Areo magazine this week on pornography, and
well, it's also about lizards.
And about lizards.
Sure.
Of course, the two things like hand in glove.
Yeah.
But
so sex, love, and sexual-autism in Areo. Yep.
The other thing that I would say is, if we're comparing your internally generated sexual fantasy with porn, right? Here's something we can say for sure. Porn is a market phenomenon. As a market phenomenon, different producers are driven to compete with each other in a market saturated with stuff. Are they delivering the ideal thing? They can't, because if they deliver the ideal thing, what separates them from everybody else? So what they're delivering is an increasingly extreme view of sex and sexuality. In order to get attention, you have to push the envelope in order to stand out. Mm-hmm. And so what we know is that porn has pushed the envelope way the hell out into crazy directions that you wouldn't think to desire if they weren't being pushed at you as normal. And so the question is, do you want to open your sexual life to this market force that pushes in the direction of extreme, or would you rather figure out what you actually want? Right? These are two very different views. And basically, I think porn's hurting you. So stop it, right? The endogenously generated stuff is natural, and therefore your tendency towards this, that, or the other is much more likely to be healthy for you.
So I agree with you, but alcohol is also hurting you. We both drink alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
We both are probably drinking more alcohol than is optimal for us. Probably any alcohol.
Well,
is
in
more
our
than is-
defense, it is 2020.
Well, but this is the question,
Yeah.
right? And just to read it again, I think this is where we're going to stop. And but I turn to the outdoors. I imagine this is a man. He says, during these times, but I'm also drawn more and more to pornography and alcohol. What advice do you have to lessen my consumption of these? We've already spent time talking about porn, but with regard to alcohol, he says it's not an addiction, but it may be becoming a habit. I don't like it, but it's oddly hard to stop. These activities seem to creep up. I feel very much this way about alcohol, actually. And the fact that the person asking the question begins with "I turn to the outdoors," I am feeling the end of summer coming, and I was lucky enough to be able to have the time to get up early this morning and strap a paddleboard on the top of the car and go out to the Willamette and spend an hour on the water. That changed my outlook on the day until I got back on the internet. Right? But certainly, if you can do that. Not that particularly necessarily, but there were already. It was pretty early, and there were already so many people out there, families with kids, fishermen, people in kayaks. Not too many at that time. People with jet skis and such. And it really is healing. But also figure out what else you do to feel your best and most complete self. Do you create? Do you discover? Do you heal other people? What is it that is your truest and best self? And can you either do more of that or expand your ability to do it? Hone your skills. So, and it became a trope early in COVID lockdowns that everyone was baking sourdough bread. And because of your gluten sensitivity, that's not something that I ended up doing. I probably would have if we had all been able to eat sourdough bread. But if you live with other people and enjoy making things for them, cooking for and with other people, making art, writing words and sharing them with other people, making things out of wood if you have access to it, wood or metal or anything. Just there are so many ways I think that you can expand what it is that you are finding value in, and it probably won't completely replace alcohol and maybe not porn, although I would advocate that you should try to completely replace the porn, but it will probably lessen the pull on you. You will probably feel less the need at some point every day. Yeah, I could really go for a drink right now.
All right. 2 things to add.
Yeah.
One, I saw an interesting, where was it, Reddit or something, expose, or maybe it was the response to one of these Ask Reddit questions about the amount of exploitation of young people involved in the porn industry. So it's hurting people. Right. So the basic answer is, look, if it's hurting people, that's probably incentive enough not to participate. Right. Because by consuming it, you are driving that harm to continue, and you have an alternative. On the other front, the alcohol front, it's great if you can take days off. Also, if you're not going to take days off, less is better. And here's a solution based on your scenario here. I can't drink beer anymore because of the gluten thing, but pint of cider or a pint of beer followed by a bike ride, it's really in some ways kind of ideal.
Maybe not in heavy traffic.
Right. Well, but you don't want to be biking in heavy traffic anyway.
Yeah.
So anyway, consider instead of having 2 or 3 pints, have 1 pint and go for a ride and see if it doesn't get you there with half the consumption.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's also true for alcohol, like almost all drugs, that taking a break makes the effects when you go back to it more interesting and powerful anyway. So, it's been years since we've done this, but for many years, I started and you decided to adopt as well a habit of saying, okay, every month every month there's going to be at least 1 week with no alcohol at all, and no drinking more than, what was it, 2 days in a row, or 2 days or 3 days in a row. I don't remember exactly what the rules were, but it keeps you honest, and it also means that when you go back to it, you actually feel it more and you enjoy it more. And what are you doing it? If you're only doing it to numb the pain, then there are bigger issues, and hopefully. For someone in enough control to write this question, there are some better ways to find to get rid of some of the pain.
Yep. Think of it as tantric drinking.
Okay.
All right. I think with that, we have reached the end of the Q&A section.
We've reached the end of something.
Yep, that we did. All right, cool. Oh, yes. And the dog has reached the end of the something with us. So, is there anything else we need to announce?
Nope. Consider joining us on our Patreons for access to private Q&A once a month on mine, access to the Discord server on either of them, access to Bret's monthly conversations with a small group of people. The next one is tomorrow.
Tomorrow. I will send out another invite in case anybody signs up between now and tomorrow to make sure that you get the link.
And we will probably be back this Tuesday, but we'll definitely be back at some point soon.
All right. Be well.